Dante Certification Level 1, 2nd Edition. Tour of Dante Controller. So this is a good time to give you a tour of Dante Controller, reviewing some of the functions we've shown you so far. And we'll start again at the very beginning. Once you have your devices and your computers plugged into the same network, just launch Dante Controller. This is a free application you can get from Audinate.com. Dante Controller will automatically identify the devices on your network. Along the top of the routing screen, we show our devices that are transmitting signal. Down the left side of the screen are all of the destinations, or receivers. You can use the plus and minus boxes to expand and collapse channel views on any given device. This is very handy as the list of devices grows, and especially when you have some devices with 64, 128, or even 512 channels on them. In the toolbar, if you click this first icon, you'll get a panel where we can filter the devices in our view. For instance, we can choose just to view video devices, pick audio devices working at a given sample rate, and so on. We also have these fields where we can type a text string and filter the devices in our view. If your device names contain common strings like a room number or a system name like BGM, any of these can be used to narrow your views quickly. To make or break a subscription, simply click at the intersection of the transmit and receive channels that you want to connect. Here, we're making and breaking a video link, but we can also go over to the audio side and do the same thing in an audio environment. Here we establish a subscription, and then we can cancel it. Now you may notice audio subscriptions taking effect more quickly than video subscriptions. If a Dante AV receiver needs to change to a new input at a different frame rate or resolution, it will need to resynchronize its signal. And once its video signal gets going, the display may need to resynchronize as well. So, if you want things to switch more quickly, standardize your system on a given frame rate and resolution. So now we've shown you how to make a single connection, but sometimes you need to make what we call a diagonal route. If we hover over the corner, we'll see a diagonal shading fill in across the grid, indicating that we can make a mass link from channels 1 to 1, 2 to 2, and so on all the way down. Just press Control-click to make the subscription. To break that, add the Shift key, so you get Shift-Control-click. Now while we're here, let's show you some basic troubleshooting skills. If you get a green check mark on your subscription, that's a good thing. That means it's working as it should. But we could get other icons that might tell us if something is wrong. I've set up two problems on this mixer just as examples. We'll show you how to see what's wrong. As soon as I open this, you'll notice on this column I can see the status of each channel. Here we have one icon with a circle and a slash through it. A bit lower I have a different symbol, the triangle with an exclamation point. Let's start on this circle with the slash through it. This icon indicates that we can see the device we're trying to link to, but there's something wrong with the link. If I hover over the connection, I'll get a tooltip with a description of the problem. This one says, subscription status is incorrect. Channel format from source and destination do not match. This is telling us that the sample rate is different between the two devices. Indeed, if I use my filter by sample rate and choose 96 kHz, I see the transmitter in this link is the only device at 96 kHz. It won't be able to talk to anyone. So earlier in this class, I mentioned that Dante Controller will prevent you from making subscriptions to devices at different sample rates. So how did this happen? Well, what I did was I had both devices at the same sample rate, made the subscription, and then I changed the sample rate on one of the devices. Now, our devices don't immediately throw away all their subscriptions when they see a mismatch, because maybe what you're going to do is move all of your devices to a new sample rate, and you still want the same connections, right? So to fix this, I need to set the devices to the same sample rate. To do that, I'll double-click the device name to open Device View. See, the prior window we were in is called Network View, which showed us all devices at once. This new window is called Device View and will show us more details on a specific device. Right now, I'm looking at the mixer, and again, you'll see the alert icons in here, which is useful. Let me go to the transmitter and change it from 96 kHz to 48 kHz. As I do, you'll see the warning icons change from the circle with the slash through it to a clock icon. The clock icon simply means that it's taking a little bit longer to make the subscription than we anticipated. Now in this case, we know that's because I'm changing the sample rate on the transmitter, so it's going to take a moment for that to take effect. Once the devices come back online, the devices connect successfully, no problem. Now, I still have a problem with these other channels here. They had that triangle with an exclamation point. Basically, that means the mixer can't find the source device on the network. Now, if we look in Device View under the Receive tab, we see the channel name and device name here. I see these are coming from stage box on stage left. If I look at my transmitters, I won't see it listed. Now, if I look on stage, I'll see that the box simply isn't powered on. So, I go to turn it on, I wait for it to recognize, and the subscriptions will restore just like that. Now, while we're in here, you'll also notice these speaker icons. These tell us if there's signal on the channel. When the signal rises above a minimum threshold, they will darken. If not, they look grayed out. If ever you're not getting a signal where you anticipate, you can use these signal presence indicators to figure out where that signal might have been dropped. Maybe an output was muted or something like that. Now, another nice Dante feature is that you don't have to work with IP addresses all the time. You can assign names to your devices. Interestingly, the Dante names aren't just for your benefit. They're used by the Dante devices themselves. Every Dante receiver remembers the name of the Dante transmitter and the name of the channel that they're supposed to pull in. Now, if you reboot your network hardware and your DHCP server issues completely new addresses to all your devices, no problem. Everything is name-based, so the subscriptions will live on. But that also means that you want to name your devices and channels before you make subscriptions. If you change names later, the devices may eventually lose their subscriptions and show you the triangle with the exclamation point. So the moral of the story, name your devices first, then make your subscriptions. Names are helpful not only when we set up a system, but when we come back to it later. As I look at these subscriptions, I can easily see that the stereo output of the mixer is being sent to these two speakers. Now you'll probably find that you don't have to label everything on a Dante system. For instance, on a stage where the inputs change frequently, oftentimes people will just label their devices and then leave the channels with their numbers. However, more permanent infrastructure like your mixer outputs, DSP in and outputs, amplifier channels, those really benefit from labeling. Not just when you're commissioning the system, but when you come back to it months or years later. All right, so let's suppose I want to name these receive channels on this device. All names are assigned in Device View. So let's double-click the device. To name the receive channels, we go to the Receive tab. I just select the line and start typing what I want. As soon as I hit enter or select another line, you'll see the name kicks in and I can go on to the next one. If we look back here, you'll notice the channels I've named don't have a number anymore, but the others do. When Dante Controller sees a channel without a name, we'll automatically substitute the channel number. However, once you give it a name, we don't append the number to it anymore. If you'd like the number to show up, just make the number part of the channel name. For me, the more channels a device has, the more likely I am to insert the number. It helps me keep track of where I am in the list, like page numbers in a book. So, since we label the receive channels in the Receive tab, it stands to reason that we label the transmit channels in the Transmit tab. Here, I'll add a few labels quickly. From there, we continue our tour. The next tab is the Status tab, which shows a great deal of information about firmware for the manufacturer's device, as well as the firmware on the Dante interface. At the bottom, you'll see detailed information on the network port itself, including the MAC address if you need it. Now we'll talk about latency in a moment, but you can imagine it takes time for data to get across the network. Right now, we're looking at the mixer, and we can see how much time we are giving streams to get from each source and how long it's actually taking to get here. This screen is very helpful when you're trying to ascertain the health of your network, and if this shows green, then that means your subscriptions are getting through just fine. In the Device Config tab, this is where we can change the name of our device. Just type a new name and click Apply. You can also set your audio sample rate and bit depth here. Finally, we have the Network Config tab, where you can set the device to get an IP address dynamically or use a static address. We can also change our topology between switched and redundant modes here. If we go back to the Network View screen, we of course start out in the Routing tab, but the other tabs have a lot of useful information in them as well. As a matter of fact, if you ever have to contact somebody for support, I recommend sending them screenshots of the next 3 tabs: Device Info, Clock Status, and Network Status. The Device Info tab will, of course, list every device. Besides the name you give it, we'll also see the manufacturer's model number and the firmware for both the device and for the Dante interface. Sometimes it's also helpful to see the IP addresses of the devices and their negotiated port speed. If a 1 gigabit device is only showing a 100 megabit connection, then that might be a reason to check the cable in the switch. In the Clock Status tab, I often look to make sure there is only 1 clock leader in the bunch. In the Network Status tab, we can get a feel for how much traffic is being sent and received by each device, what the latency settings are, and whether there's any latency or packet errors at the end. Finally, we come to the event log. Now there's 2 things you should know about this. First, these log entries aren't stored anywhere on the network. Dante devices simply transmit their log entries to any instance of Dante Controller running on the network, and Dante Controller will capture those and remember them. So, if something were to happen, you can't suddenly launch Dante Controller later and get the log entry. It's too late. So what some people do is they just let Dante Controller run in the background so that they can capture this information as it happens. Now, the second thing to understand is that a lot of people overreact to what they see in here. They assume everything is an error message, and that's not the case. For instance, if we look at these entries, we'll see it says that a device was elected as a clock leader. That's not a problem, that's normal operation. One of the most common calls we get from Dante beginners is that they launch Dante Controller and then turn all their Dante devices on. So think about this. Every time a new Dante device comes online, a new clock election happens. So in their log, they might see the clock leader change hands several times. And all of a sudden they think something is wrong. But that's the normal process, right? As all of your devices turn on, they automatically negotiate. So it's no big deal. Now, if you ever want to save or clear your messages, you have buttons here at the bottom. So what we usually tell the beginner is simply to clear their log and then watch for future clock leader changes. Ignore that moment where everything is first turning on. Watch for once the system stabilizes. So with that, that's our tour of Dante Controller.